Number 4, Texas 2024 preseason preview after the stinger. Hello and welcome to episode 54 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you so much for joining us on this Monday morning where we are going to talk about the Texas Longhorns 2024 SEC championship contenders, a college football playoff team in 2023 who, the way that our rankings stack up, look like a worthy candidate to get there again. So before we dig into how the CFB Winning Edge team strength, power ratings, and all of our other numbers see the Longhorns this year, I want to, of course, say thank you to those of you who are joining us live, but we very much appreciate if you would subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Help this preview series to grow by giving our video a like, and then, of course, stay tuned for all the great content coming out on an almost daily basis at Campus to Canton for YouTube. Of course, the Campus to Canton podcast feed also has content popping up just about every single day. And then if you are subscribed to CampusToCanton.com, of course, a wide range of content is available there all the time. There's written pieces coming up all throughout the week, but of course, rankings for your college fantasy football teams, the C2C format of the game, which has both NFL and college fantasy, and then Devi as well. So there's Discord access, all kinds of great stuff, new tools showing up all the time. There's a draft tool that the team unveiled last week that is now, I believe, only available to our NIL members and up, but that also includes our all 22 tier members. So if you want access to everything that Campus to Canton has to offer, that all 22 tier is probably your best bet. That includes CFB Winning Edge databases, our team profiles, our returning production database that we talk about a lot on these shows we use in these previews. But then, of course, you can also be a C2C Winning Edge tier member as well. So thank you so much to those of you who like the video, who subscribe to both the site and the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. We really, really do appreciate it. Before we dig into Texas, real quick, couple of notes from over the weekend, or actually I should say late on Friday, when I did mention a couple of notes. I made a real big mistake. When we were talking about North Texas, I was talking about Juwan Price and how he was showing up and how would that impact Zach Evans, who looked like the clear top running back. Well, Akeka Ragsdale is still there, and though he was severely limited by injury last season, and there was a piece on Friday that was published by Brett Vito of the Denton Record Chronicle, who of course does a great job covering the Mean Green, all about Ragsdale and how he, quote, aims to regain his status as one of his UNT's top players. And for whatever reason, he just completely escaped my attention, my memory, when we were talking about it a little bit yesterday. So do keep in mind any of our discussion that we talked about on Friday and how that running back group might shake out. Ragsdale is still probably the player to beat atop that depth chart, but coming back from an injury opens opportunities for the other guys as well. And North Texas does have a history of spreading the football around pretty well. So don't be surprised if Ragsdale and Evans and maybe a little bit of Price, those guys end up forming a decent trio there at North Texas. So also at the running back position at LSU, the Tigers, somebody we talked about all spring, a topic that basically every practice update, it seemed like we were talking about how LSU has only 2 scholarship running backs. Josh Williams and Caleb Johnson are the only guys who are getting reps this spring among scholarship running backs. Caleb Jackson, excuse me. But of course, we figured that LSU would enter the transfer portal, get somebody who was in the transfer portal, add some depth to that unit. Well, they did in a way because John Emery Jr. had entered the transfer portal after a senior season at LSU where he ran for 120 yards, a touchdown on 23 carries in 7 games. Emery, it looked like for a little while, might be headed to UCLA. That was the team that popped up the most, it seemed, when I saw his name connected as potentially having other opportunities. Well, Emery instead is withdrawing from the transfer portal, headed back to Baton Rouge, where he will factor in alongside Williams and Jackson in that LSU running back room. So adding some depth, the Tigers just basically able to hold on to somebody from last year. And then there's I think plenty of firepower in that LSU offense. Wouldn't expect necessarily any of those top 3 running backs to put up huge numbers. Williams led that trio with 284 yards, 5 touchdowns in 55 attempts on the ground last season. I know there are a lot of folks who are really high on Jackson long term, but it sounded like this spring Williams still maybe had a slight lead. Perhaps Jackson's talent will ultimately win out, but Emery being there and in the mix is certainly a good thing for this LSU team as far as depth goes. So I wanted to follow up on that. And then Kansas State. We mentioned Kansas State before we started these more in-depth team previews. In our first 50 episodes, we had a team of the day that we tried to, might have been 5 minutes, it might have been 15 minutes, but wanted to focus on a team that perhaps was a little bit under the radar. And we talked about Kansas State in episode 50 and how K-State is a team that our CFP Winning Edge power rankings are much lower on than a lot of others out there. One of the reasons our numbers show that the offensive line is going to take a bit of a step back with a lot of the turnover that it has had since the end of last season, and the Wildcats made an effort to boost that depth, go to the FCS level, where Colin Truitt, who's a multi-year starter at Chattanooga, is now committed to K-State for his final year of eligibility. Truitt missed the 2023 season, but was a starter at right tackle in 2022 and started a lot of games dating back to 2018. I believe he started his career at Cincinnati, then was a redshirt freshman All-American in 2019. And then, seemed like perhaps injuries might have been a factor for him the last few years, but a lot of experience there at a position where a team like K-State probably underrated in our projections. A lot of folks see K-State as a legitimate Big 12 title contender, one of the favorites, perhaps with Utah maybe being kind of consensus number 1 in a lot of the early rankings that I've seen, but K-State very much in the mix, number 2, number 3, according to a lot of smart folks. And our numbers see it a little bit different. We'll find out who's right sooner rather than later. But let's focus now on Texas. Texas, of course, last season was excellent, quite honestly. Certainly a couple of games that the Horns and their fans would like to have had back, but beating Alabama in the regular season early on, getting to the college football playoff, of course, just an excellent season, a way to end their run through the Big 12 with a championship victory in a pretty dominant fashion over Oklahoma State. But what are others saying at this point about Texas? As far as preseason or regular season win totals go, at DraftKings, the Longhorns are currently listed with 10.5 wins. We will revisit that later in the show. DraftKings also has Texas at plus 750 to win the college football playoff. That's behind only Georgia and Ohio State in those national championship futures. Texas is plus 320 to win the SEC, second only to Georgia in those odds. And then just a somewhat smattering of other outlets, their individual power rankings or write-ups on rankings, other analytic systems in the mix here as well. Looks like the high point for Texas in a lot of these that I've been referencing, they're number 3 in ESPN's power rankings from Mark Schlabach, also number 3 in The Athletic, their postseason rankings done by Stuart Mandel, number 3 as well in the Sporting News, and number 3 in ESPN's Football Power Index. Texas is number 4 in SP Plus at ESPN. Andy Staples has Texas. Andy Staples is on 3 at number 6. And then the lowest that I've seen so far, Beta Ranked, which does purely analytical projections. The 2024 numbers there from Sharp College Football have Texas at number 8. So everybody, whether it's folks who do it a little bit more in the traditional way, whether it's more a computer-focused projection system, this Texas team is absolutely a playoff contender in the eyes of just about any way you could look at it. As far as talent goes, this is certainly one of the best rosters in college football. The quarterback position is a real strength. The offensive line might be the best in the country. The big unknown is changing conferences. How will that impact how Texas plays on the field each and every week? And then, of course, some tough non-conference matchups as well, including one that'll be one of the premier non-conference matchups in the country. But let's take a look first at last season. The results, touched on it quite briefly. I'm going to share my screen here, which if this is your first time with us and you don't know what I'm referencing as far as, CFB winning edge or team strength or roster strength, team performance, things like that, those are part of our what you can get at campuscanton.com as an all 22 or C2C winning edge tier member. We reference these sheets all the time, have projected depth charts, have all of our numbers in there. And part of that is breakdown of how last season went. So looking at the schedule, looking at post-game win expectancy numbers from collegefootballdata.com, Texas absolutely earned its 12-2 record. Dominant early on, 100% post-game win expectancy in 3 of their first 5 games, 99% against Wyoming. The low point was a very impressive, still 66% in that 34-24 victory over Alabama. Did, of course, come up short against Oklahoma. That game, if you look at the box score, could have gone either way. If you run that box score, 1,000 times, Texas might have won it 48%, but Oklahoma came out, of course, when it mattered on top, 34-30 in that game. Texas bounced back, gets the remainder of Big 12 play, runs the table, including an overtime victory over K-State, 33-30, which was, of course, key. Dominant performance in that regular season finale against Texas Tech, 57-7, entering the Big 12 championship against a tough Oklahoma State squad where they put up 49, and then just run into a buzzsaw that was Washington and couldn't quite did have the ball at the end with a chance to win the game, right? But Michael Penix Jr. and that Washington team on its way to the national championship game, just a little too much to be able to knock off. But looking over at some of the important numbers that we like to highlight in our team profiles, these all reference the 2023 regular season and FBS opponents only. So this does not include the playoff, does not include the Big 12 championship. That, not including that for teams that are, of this caliber of Texas can it maybe isn't the perfect way to do it, but when we're looking at 135 teams, it really is better for the grand vision of our team profiles and all of our numbers to exclude those postseason games. So Texas, did rank number 6 in overall team performance, played like a true playoff team, not one of the top 4 teams in the country, but right there in the mix, very solid. We use a 3-year weighted team performance number in our preseason power rankings, and Texas has been a top 5 team. If you look at that 3-year window, they are 8th nationally in the 5-year weighted team performance. So this Texas team has just been getting better and better, obviously, over the last few seasons. And offensively, this actually wasn't the elite Texas offense that perhaps it could be still. Texas was 22nd in offensive team performance, top 20 in passing offensive team performance, top 30 in rushing offensive team performance. But something a little bit different perhaps than what we were used to seeing from Texas for quite a while. If out there you were unaware, the CFB Winning Edge podcast, our co-host Scott Bogman is a Texas fan. We've been doing that show for 5 years, and the first 4 of it, there were a lot of complaints from Scott about Texas defensively and tackling, and how that defense really was the weak link for a Texas program that was underachieving compared to its talent profile. Well, last year they fixed the defense, and looking in years past, it's been moving in the right direction. 2022 was a top 20 unit after being 99th in 2021, but number 6 in defensive team performance overall last season, top 25 against the pass, top 10 against the run. But a little bit different than the first 3 teams that we discussed in these in-depth team previews, where number 1, Ohio State was elite in a lot of categories, a lot of top 5s, a lot of top 3s. Georgia, just as good. Oregon, maybe to the surprise of some, consistently in those team performance numbers and statistically. And these stats are big pieces of those team performance calculations. Was one of the top 2 or 3 teams in college football, despite missing the playoff last season. While Texas, ended up as a top 5 team and enters this season as a top 5 team, but they're more on paper, at least in these statistical terms, a little more like a top 10, top 15 type team. So there is a little bit of room for improvement compared to how Texas played on the field last season. But if you look at net scoring margin, they were 11th last season, outscored opponents by 17.7 points against those FBS opponents only. In the regular season, they were 12th in net yards per play, 18th in yards per play on offense, 26th on defense. Do the simple math there, and they come out 1.5 yards on the positive in net yards per play, so they're 12th there. Net points per drive, those come from Brian Fremeau of BCF Toys, and maybe one of my favorite stats, honestly, in college football. Texas finished 12th last season, top 20 on offense, 13th on defense. Net yards per pass attempt, there's a lot of data to suggest maybe a little bit more at the NFL level, but I think it is key, a key number in college football as well. But net yards per pass attempt is really indicative of team success, really helps to show if you are coming out on the right side of things. And Texas ranked 20th in that number last season, 21st in net success rate. The biggest bit of improvement, perhaps room for improvement, is that Texas offensively ranked 47th last season in success rate. Top 15 on defense, ended up bringing that number very close to a top 20 position nationally, but still a little more efficiency, a little more consistency on the offensive side of the ball, and Texas could make a big jump there. And then our EPA margin equivalent, we use PPA from collegefootballdata.com. Texas right around top 40 nationally on the offensive side of the ball, inside the top 20 defensively. And the math there puts them in the top 25 nationally. You can look at pace numbers, kind of middle of the pack as far as time between snaps, which we track here, and 32nd in offensive plays per game for Texas last season. How does the returning production stack up? That is next up for us. Texas, I mean, there's a bit of a theme here with this top four in our early team previews. Texas does rank 24th in overall, returning production. A big part of that, of course, is Quinn Ewers being there. Again, leading this Texas offense. Last season, he ranked, last season, he had 3,500 yards, nearly 8.8 yards per attempt, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Of course, Ewers did miss a couple of games. Malik Murphy was able to step in and sort of keep things going for Texas. But Ewers, injuries and unavailability at certain points over the last couple of seasons has been a little bit of a weak spot for him. Hopefully he will be back and fully healthy in every game this year. Murphy is moving on, but Arch Manning is back and ready to take over certainly that top backup spot after getting just a little bit of playing time as a true freshman last year. But nevertheless, Ewers, having one of the more highly rated quarterbacks in college football. David Hale, we talked about the work that he did at ESPN recently and produced those quarterback tiers, all 134 FBS teams. Hale had this QB room at Texas among that top tier 1. There were, I think, 4 teams fully listed, and Ewers and Manning definitely among the best in college football collectively. Greg McElroy recently called Ewers a top 2 quarterback in college football, with Georgia's Carson Beck being the only QB better in his eyes. And then, I've been looking at some of those look ahead to the 2025 draft class. Bruce Feldman put together a great piece at The Athletic recently that has some quotes about Quinn Ewers. There's a Big 12 assistant who says, I think, quoting here from the piece, I think he's just trying to figure things out. Sark, of course, head coach Steve Sarkisian, does such a good job of setting things up for him. And so you'll see times where he'll rip it, but then there are other times he just seems a little timid. Another former Big 12 assistant, the former Big 12 rival, I should say, defensive assistant, quote, I'm very curious to watch him this year. The last 2 years, he had superstars around him. There's some, oh my God, throws on film that he made against Alabama, but he was just so inconsistent. I think he's about average athletically. So, Quinn Ewers, one of the highest rated quarterbacks in college football. If you look at our individual player ratings, he's among the tops in college football. If you look at those tier ratings from David Hale at ESPN and other folks, it's understandable that Quinn Ewers is ranked among the top at his position entering 2024. But there is still, again, some room for improvement, like a lot of those numbers. This Texas team really broke through last season. Conference championship, college football playoff, beat Alabama, and still offensively, there's still more to come, perhaps. So if we get a fully healthy season from Quinn Ewers, where he is able to become a little bit more consistent, a little more efficient, this Texas team absolutely, I think, has the potential to do even more this year. At the running back position, looking at the rushing numbers, Jonathan Brooks, of course, is a loss, running for over 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns last season, but that was just in 10 games, and Brooks went down with injury. CJ Baxter and Jaydon Blue step up, become, one of the entering this season, one of the top running back duos in college football. The two combined for over 1,000 yards last year. Baxter, 5 rushing touchdowns, Blue with 3. Blue showed some just explosive big play ability. Most folks seem to think that Baxter's got an edge in the competition. Going to see, he certainly more than doubled as a true freshman Blue's workload as far as carries and total attempts. Nevertheless, there are some folks who think that Blue and his explosive ability are going to give him an opportunity to perhaps make this a real, workload share out of the backfield. If not, Blue perhaps could end up atop the rushing leaderboard by the end of the season. Regardless of how it shakes out, those two are, one of the best duos in college football, and certainly think that either or both are going to be capable of putting up some big numbers this season. The receiving core is, is obviously, if you can see my screen here, there is a lot of blue, the, sort of brighter royal blue. If this is the first time you're seeing our returning production database, indicates players who moved on to the NFL early. So early entrance into the NFL, which of course Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell were. AD Mitchell, tight end Jatavian Sanders as well. Those guys put up excellent numbers, and Quinn Ewers not having them this season is something to watch. So Worthy, of course, big play, wide receiver, explosive speed, targeted nearly 120 times last season, 75 catches, over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. Mitchell became the touchdown maker. He had 11 TDs, 845 yards on 55 catches, targeted 86 times. Sanders was, one of the most productive tight ends in college football. Didn't get in the end zone all that often, only 2 TD catches, but 45 catches for 682 yards. And then Jordan Whittington was just, consistent, somebody who did a lot of good work, maybe away from the cameras at times, and somebody who had a lot of trust. I think the coaching staff had a lot of trust in Jordan Whittington. So even though, 1 touchdown catch, a little over 500 yards on 42 receptions, may not look irreplaceable, and it's not. Texas, obviously, this other blue color are transfers coming in, and a lot of those players have been productive at the FBS level, at the Power 4 conference level. But nevertheless, Whittington and being a starter, being somebody who was on the field a lot for the Longhorns throughout his career, is going to be a little bit of a loss there. But who's coming in? 3 starters expected are going to be transfers coming in, at least based on their production last season. Silas Bolden did not participate in spring practice, but he is on campus now, transferring in from Oregon State. Isaiah Bond expected to be the top target this year, the transfer from Alabama, where he looks to improve on 48 catches, 668 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Matthew Golden's been a little bit, some might say, according to some reports, maybe a little disappointing after coming on campus in Austin. He's dealt with some injuries, the transfer from Houston. He was a C2C favorite a couple of years ago coming out of high school, but there's maybe a little bit of cautious optimism, or maybe even a little bit of pessimism right now around Matthew Golden and the impact that he might make at Texas. Wasn't always practicing with that top unit this spring at the wide receiver position. Johntay Cook, true freshman last year, who got a little bit of an opportunity. And then we'll talk Ryan Wingo, true freshman, coming in. There's been more buzz about those 2 players in particular, but there are others certainly capable of stepping up, playing a bigger role this year. Nevertheless, I think Golden will eventually emerge as one of the top 3 in this wide receiver group, and is the high end NFL potential of this receiving room as good as it was last year. I think you can clearly see based on what the numbers those guys did and did move on to the NFL and were drafted in a nice spot. it's going to be tough. Nevertheless, Texas addressed its needs by going heavy in the portal there. The offensive line, we've talked about it. It is one of, if not the best in college football from an experience standpoint. 4 full-time starters are back, so they're going to be in really good shape there. Defensively, the numbers aren't bad. Losing leading tackler Jalen Ford, losing some key pieces on the defensive line in Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. Those are big losses. A lot of experience there in Ryan Watts and Jaron Thompson. Thompson transferring to Auburn, I believe. Watts moving on out after running out of eligibility, but a lot returns, and Texas also was pretty active in the transfer portal on the defensive side of the ball as well. Put it all together, Texas ranks 24th nationally in returning production, which is high for a team that recruits as well as this Texas program does. A lot of top 5, top 10 raw talent numbers across the board, which we'll dig into soon. You get a lot of guys who come in, spend 3 years, move on to the NFL, which, that's something we just talked about, especially with that receiving core. Nevertheless, Texas still ranks in the top 30 nationally in our adjusted offensive returning production. They are top 50 nationally just in raw returning production, not even accounting for those incoming transfers. That's very, very solid for a team that is as talented from top to bottom as the Longhorns are. Defensively, they're 43rd in adjusted returning production, 60th in raw defense. But nevertheless, Texas is bringing back a lot more than it's losing, and that puts the Longhorns in a good position to compete in year one in the SEC. So how does it look for Texas depth chart wise? You got a little bit of a sneak peek when we were talking in the breakdown as far as the stats from last season go. But going back to our team profiles on the offensive side of the ball, it is easy, I think, to expect that Quinn Ewers is going to be the starter at quarterback. CJ Baxter going to get that first snap in the backfield, most likely. We've got Golden, Bond, and Bolden as that projected trio of wide receivers. You could make an argument that Johntay Cook should be there, maybe ahead of Bolden. And by the way, in our team profiles, necessarily set up to suggest that Golden's number 1, Bond's number 2, Bolden's number 3. That's not really how we do it. It's more so just based on who are the 3 guys. So that maybe I should be a little more clear and reorder those, but don't let that confuse you, hopefully. Golden is the most likely of those 3 as it stands right now, according to reports coming out of spring, perhaps to be taken off of that starting lineup, and then probably Johntay Cook, although there were some real positive words about DeAndre Moore Jr. this spring, and then Ryan Wingo, true freshman, could emerge as well. The offensive line, as we said, 4 full-time starters are back. Cameron Williams coming in, most likely to start at the right tackle position. And then Texas, played in some blowouts last year, rotated some offensive linemen. So even that second group, you get a lot of guys with double-digit percentage snap counts as well. So there's some experience behind that, top 4 group on the offensive line. Defensively, 4 full-time starters, and the way we calculate whether or designate whether somebody is a starter, gets their name in bold, is were they on the field for that first snap of the game in 51% of last year's contest. Sorrell was, David Gabina at linebacker, and then defensive backs Jade Barryn and Michael Taff were starters from last season. But as you can see, even more than the offensive line, defensively, Texas rotated quite a bit. So you get somebody like Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, who both played more than a third of their team snaps last season. Ethan Burke was a starter actually at the edge, which we bumped him down to the second team because Trey Moore, who is maybe, has the potential, I think, to be one of the biggest impact defensive players in college football this season. And recently at ESPN, Draft analyst Matt Miller put Moore on his list of 2025 NFL draft sleepers. He talked to a couple of scouts about the players on this list, and one AFC scout, according to Miller, that covers the state of Texas, compared him to Dallas Turner, formerly of Alabama, 17th overall pick of the Vikings in the most recent draft. And Miller said that Moore is exactly what Texas was missing. He's light, but has just been incredibly productive throughout his career. Last season, he had 38 pressures. He had 14 sacks, 17 and a half tackles for loss, and arguably might not have even been his best year to date. So getting Trey Moore into the mix, that's a big reason why this Texas defense, especially as far as rushing the passer, could put up even better numbers this year. And the interior defensive line, that might be tough. But again, any hole that anything that looked like a potential trouble spot on this roster, and the interior defensive line was one. Steve Sarkisian and his coaching staff, went and got experienced, talented players to fill those, or at least add depth, if not fill those starting spots. So Jermaine Lowell ended up at Texas after briefly committing to Oklahoma, previously of Louisville and Arizona State. He'll spend his final season in Austin. Bill Norton, who's bounced around a bit as well, started at Georgia, became an impact player at Arizona. Both of those players over 300 pounds, a combined 40 career starts. So a lot of size and experience coming in through the transfer portal. I think they're going to be just fine there. The evolution of Anthony Hill Jr., second leading tackler last season as a true freshman. He will step in, be a full-time starter at linebacker this year. And in the defensive backfield, there's a lot of experience there as well, bringing in Andrew Mukuba from Clemson, where he was a 31-game starter. Also, maybe a little bit of a under-the-radar player through the transfer portal, Javion Cole, who had a huge year at San Jose State last season as a sophomore. He was a spring addition to that Texas backfield, defensive backfield secondary as well. So put it all together, Texas ranks number 3 in overall roster strength, number 4 on the offensive side of the ball, number 6 on defense. Some of that is, the raw talent that Texas has accumulated over the years. Texas ranks number 1 nationally in the average 247 Sports composite rating at the quarterback position, number 2 in the offensive skill positions, according to 247 Sports. If you look at the similar numbers put out by rivals and On3, Texas is number 1 at offensive skill positions. The wide receiver unit, despite all that turnover, number 3 in raw talent, the way that we calculate it. Top 15 unit at tight end, bringing in Amari Niblack from Alabama, expected to start with Gunnar Helm getting a lot of action last season, a lot of time on the field, less productive as a receiver than JT Sanders. But that tight end position still looking quite good on paper. Expect that it'll be a positive in the receiving game as well. Defensively, maybe not best of the best at any one position, but top 3 in those 247 Sports composite ratings at DB, number 5 at linebacker, number 7 on the defensive line. So you take in that raw talent with a top 25 returning production calculation, a lot of production, for the players who are returning. Ewers, Baxter, even Golden, Bolden, Niblack, all have made some improvement as far as their on-field production to improve their individual player ratings heading into this season. But last bit of it, looking at the schedule in that win total projection for Texas, starting at home against Colorado State. We expect Texas to be a big, big favorite in that game. Take care of the Rams, no problem. But then, a little bit tricky, Michigan at the Big House in week 2. This is a much, much different Michigan team, certainly, but the defending national champions in one of the toughest places to play in college football is going to be a tough assignment for the Longhorns. Nevertheless, we have Texas as about a field goal favorite in our current projections. UTSA and ULM. UTSA has been a consistent winner under Jeff Traylor since he became head coach, but this UTSA team has undergone the biggest amount of turnover that we've seen roster-wise in the Traylor era. ULM consistently, ranks toward the very bottom in our roster strength ratings. Expect Texas is going to get through those two quite easily as well. The SEC opener against Mississippi State in Austin. Mississippi State is our second lowest rated SEC team in our team strength power rankings, so Texas expect will get off to a good start there. Get an extra week to prepare for the Red River shootout against Oklahoma, where, again, we have Texas as a slight favorite. Get a little revenge over the Sooners last season, and then, have a date at home with Georgia, which is, one of the top 2, top 3 biggest games currently on the college football calendar as far as just looking at our power rankings and teams that we expect to be national title contenders. Georgia and Texas are top 2 teams in the SEC as far as our power ratings go. It's going to be a huge, huge matchup. Putting it on the calendar right behind Oklahoma is a little bit tricky for Texas because, perhaps there's a little bit of a whatever emotion comes out of that game, whether it's relief of winning or excitement, everybody patting you on the back for beating Oklahoma the week leading into that date with Georgia, or if it doesn't go the right way, the way that Texas hopes it will, is there an opportunity to let one loss turn into 2 and things perhaps start to spiral a little bit in year 1 of the SEC? I don't expect that, but that's just, the kind of the quirkiness in how some of these schedules are put together. I want to use this time to just think through some of those things a little bit, and having Oklahoma and Georgia back to back, to me, I probably would want, I'd rather have Vanderbilt, in that week, and then, Georgia after Vandy. But of course, that's not how it worked out. So a tough 2 weeks. Texas, however it works out against Oklahoma and Georgia, should take care of business against Vandy, you would expect. Get a week off, and then the month of November is manageable. There are tough matchups. Florida is going to be fighting for its life, probably, with the toughest schedule in college football. Arkansas, a longtime rival of Texas. Perhaps Sam Pittman and his coaching staff fighting for their lives, like Billy Napier and his staff at Florida may likely be, if things haven't, figured themselves out at that point. But that game in Fayetteville will be tough. And then the home date against Kentucky, who consistently ranks, top 20, top 25 in our power rankings. That is maybe a little bit of a overlooked game on the schedule because of where it sits with the trip to College Station, of course, there at the end. But as I'm sure you noticed, we do have Texas favored in all 12 regular season games. That game against Georgia is a toss-up. We have Texas as about a half-point favorite. We also have Texas as about a field goal favorite, give or take a few percentage points against Michigan and Oklahoma, and then a little less than a touchdown, 5.2 is our projection against Texas A&M. All of those are losable games. All of those are, games that maybe not a pure toss-up. That projected winning percentage against Texas A&M is 62%, but the way we calculate our projected win totals, we take that 62%, That converts to 0.62 wins. Total that with the 74%, 0.74 wins against Kentucky, 77%, 0.77 wins against Arkansas, on and on. And we get to an understandably and notably low 9.3 is our projected win total. And the way that we do those projections, the way we've done them each of the last 3 seasons, has worked out for us quite well from a win-loss percentage standpoint. I've mentioned the numbers in each of these previews, mentioned them in our CFP Winning Edge conference previews as well, but we've been over 60% across all FBS teams in these projected win totals dating back to 2021. We were 55.6% last season. Nevertheless, we think that there's some room for improvement in those calculations, especially with teams like Texas that are on the extreme high end of that win total number. So 10.5 at DraftKings, we're always basically going to be under 10.5 for any team. Including our top 4 teams, obviously. So wanted to look at it a little bit differently. I'm going to be tracking another number as well. This 9.3 is our official win total projection for Texas, and we will officially be under the 10.5 as far as our how we score it at the end of the year for those win percentage numbers that I'll reference every episode basically. But I wanted to give a little bit of a bonus, wanted to try to give, Texas and others a shot to get closer to that 10.5. Also wanted to do this because we're basically over everybody on the extreme low end, the 1.5s, the 2.5s in those win totals. So get a 10% bonus for every game in which you are favored. Get a 10% penalty for every game in which you are an underdog. Texas, of course, favored in all 12. So we get 1.2 wins added, and boom, right there, right with the folks at DraftKings and whoever else probably at 10.5 wins if we add that. So again, officially, we're going to be under. And I didn't go into great detail on it today. I rattled off for a while on our Oregon preview about my way of thinking. Changing conferences is, I think, most difficult perhaps for the teams who are moving. Yeah, you get a little bit of a element of surprise in some way because your opponents haven't really maybe seen you or game plan for you, haven't seen you that much, I should say, in scouting other opponents or other games previously. But you flip it, and Texas is going to have to do that almost every week. Mississippi State, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, Texas A&M. There haven't been very, very many of those matchups in a while. This Texas coaching staff, has SEC experience, certainly. But the last few years, that coaching staff has been, dealing with Big 12 conference game prep every week. And it kind of adds up over the course of a year, where, you can prep for a brand new non-conference opponent, not a big deal, maybe a brand new, team here and there. But when you have to do it over and over again every week, almost for most of the year, I wonder a little bit, is one of these, these matchups where we say Texas is a clear favorite, 10 points, 2 touchdowns, something like that. Is one of those maybe just a little bit more of a potential, trip or trouble spot, in part because just that grind of preparing for new opponents week in and week out catches up a little bit with the coaching staff. I'm not sure. More important is, injuries and things like that, how the schedule sets up as far as home and away. And for the most part, that looks quite good for Texas. Only 4 true road games, with Michigan, with Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Texas A&M being those road games. The neutral site matchup, of course, against Oklahoma, but everybody else at home. No funky, Friday night, Thursday night, anything like that. So it sets up quite well otherwise, perhaps with the exception, as we discussed, of that Oklahoma and Georgia back-to-back is maybe not ideal. But everywhere else, this schedule, I think, looks quite good for Texas. And our numbers really think Texas is one of the top 5 rosters in college football, with an opportunity, to be one of the top 5 teams this year. So we will, of course, see how it all plays out. But the way that we do our roster strength ratings based on our team performance numbers from past years, our head coaching performance numbers, which are head coach specific team performance based on those talent numbers, experience, production, throw it all together, and our projections really like Texas in year 1 of the SEC. So that is going to do it for us today. We will be back on Wednesday with our number 5 team in our preseason power ranking projections at CFP Winning Edge. That's going to be the Ole Miss Rebels, where we might be on the high side compared to just about everybody on Ole Miss. But we'll dig into all the numbers and why CFP Winning Edge and our projections are quite high on Lane Kiffin's squad this year. But as always, thank you for tuning in, whether you've done so live, whether you are catching a replay on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, where, of course, we hope that you will subscribe there, give this video a like, help us out, and then please do check out campustocanton.com, where you can join for as little as $2.99 per month, or go all the way up to the all 22 or C2C Winning Edge tier packages and get access to all 134 returning production team pages, our team profiles for all 134 teams as well. We've got stat projections coming up later this summer. We'll have similarly individual team pages for all 134 teams with stat projections for quarterback, running back, wide receiver, the teams as a whole, team performance, all that great stuff. So check it out if you would. We very much would love your support at campustocanton.com. So we will see you on Wednesday. Until then, I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFP Winning Edge and Campus to Canton. Take care.